Hi everyone. This week, while trying to think of what to say, I stumbled across a blog post. It resounded with me, firstly because our home church often talks about power dynamics, and secondly because I found it to be a very interesting week for New Zealand politics. I'm going to quote from that blog post now. The world's oldest religion is the religion of the scapegoat. It is the It is the religion where human beings solve violence between them by ganging up on one individual who is then killed. The death of the scapegoat creates unity, for the murder is all against one, after all, and for a while the violence ceases. It is thought that not only did this practice enable early humans to survive violence, but the refinement of the practice and careful repetition created the first religions. Today, humans are still sacrificed. We know that a prime minister can create at least a temporary peace by sacrificing a cabinet minister or two to calm a scandal. Of course, even that's a problem, because the Prime Minister can't kill the cabinet ministers, so they can always pay him back later. The article goes on to talk about how politicians also manipulate crowds to draw criticism away from themselves and onto someone else. That someone else is always an outsider. The scapegoats are sacrificed in one way or another, and the peace of the majority reigns. I thought about Palm Sunday reading this blog, because for me, Palm Sunday is one of the most obviously political events in Jesus' life. This is because, in this passage, Matthew is telling us that Jesus is a king. Matthew says that Jesus rides into Jerusalem to fulfill Zechariah's prophecy about a coming warrior king who will restore Israel to its former glory. In fact, he's so adamant about connecting Jesus to the prophecy that he even implies that he rides two donkeys at once. Zechariah's prophecy says, "Your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So Matthew writes that a donkey and a colt are prepared for Jesus to sit on. What's really happening here, unless Jesus used the colt as a footstool, which I did spend a bit of time imagining and thought wouldn't work, is that Matthew is far more concerned about emphasizing the importance of Jesus fulfilling a prophecy than he is about giving us a literal step-by-step narrative of what happened on that day. Secondly, Jesus knows about this scripture. It's not like Matthew knows it and Jesus didn't. Jesus has made very deliberate decisions to claim that he is a king. Jesus knows this because he grew up in the temple. He learnt these prophecies at a young age. By choosing to enter Jerusalem on a donkey, Jesus is explicitly claiming to be the king. This claim is further reinforced by the fact that Jesus planned to go to Jerusalem via the Mount of Olives. There's another prophecy in Zechariah that the Messiah will appear on the Mount of Olives. Through these deliberate decisions, Jesus is claiming he's the king that Israel's waited for. And finally, what I love is that the people in the crowd are responding to what Jesus says in the most appropriate way. They know that his actions are saying, I am a king, there's a new king in town, it's going to be a revolution, get behind it. Some people will know that this is what he's claiming because they remember 20 and 30 years ago when other people who claimed to be messiahs came into Jerusalem and started violent revolutions. those revolutions didn't succeed and their followers were killed. But hey, maybe this Jesus guy could succeed. We know that other people are very much aware that Jesus is a king because of what they do when they see him. They lay their cloaks down for his donkey to walk over, and they wave palm leaves in the air. This is because they know their scripture too. They know the story about how when the prophet Elisha anointed a new king in defiance of an existing one, the new king's followers laid down their cloaks for him to stand on. Similarly, other people will remember history stories that they've heard from their family about how when Judas Maccabeus kicked the foreign rulers out of Judea, he was welcomed into Jerusalem by a crowd waving palm branches. And Maccabeus' royal dynasty ended up reigning Israel for over 100 years. So on one hand, how the crowd is reacting right now is a very rational thing to do, and they're entirely correct in expecting Jesus to kick out the Romans and be a new king. But on the other hand, they've got it completely wrong. Let's do a thought experiment. If Jesus was a revolutionary leader, like how people thought he would be, what would his rule have been like 5 years in? At some point, the sense of victory and nationalism and joy will fade. There's probably some economic impacts from exiting the Roman Empire. A lot of young men would have died in the big battles, leaving grieving families and villages without as much manual labour. The political heat would be rising, and rivals will be scheming. So the old political tricks come out again. The public execution of a well-known and very disliked person could win you some points. And if there's a lot of political pressure out there, well, there's truly nothing more political than directing the wrath of the crowd away from you onto someone relatively powerless, who's usually completely or mostly innocent. Now let's change the topic. I've always found Palm Sunday to be a bit of a strange day, knowing what I know what's going to happen on Friday. Going from a street party on Sunday to the foot of the cross on Friday is a bit jarring. It was very difficult to try and wrap my head around. I just wanted to stay in the street party. Why did Friday have to come? But maybe that tension is the point. What is going to happen this coming week is going to completely flip the very rational and educated narrative of what everybody in Jerusalem thought Jesus was going to do and who he was claiming to be. Instead of following the path trod by other revolutionaries before, Jesus never raises a finger against the political leadership. Instead, he hangs out in the temple, where he once again refuses to buy into politics, this time the politics of the religious leaders. Instead of pouring righteous anger on the heads of tax collectors and sex workers, he blesses them, saying they will be first in the kingdom and the religious leaders will be last. And ultimately, Jesus will embrace the role of the scapegoat. He will go meekly and quietly to his death, a politically convenient one for Herod. He will never defend himself. He will be abused and tortured. He will be weak, and barely anyone will publicly support him. When Matthew sits down to write this gospel, and he looks back on Palm Sunday, he does so knowing that Friday is coming. Yet he still sees today as a day of victory. He still claims the King has come. And in this kingdom, There is no scapegoat. We are no longer bound by our seemingly inevitable cycle of violent power, aggressor, and victim. Jesus has a different way. Instead, we live in true peace. You are now my brother, and you are now my sister, because nothing separates us now that Christ is our King. As we celebrate Palm Sunday, let us remember that Jesus flips our world on its head. May we embody this new kingdom of true peace that Christ, the King, who we love and serve, has brought us. Have a great Easter week.